Jimmy Dura, host of All Things Veterinary, a podcast that connects and unites the animal health community with ideas and innovation, topics to inspire you and energize your day. Hello and welcome to another episode of the All Things Veterinary Podcast. Today, we have a little bit of a unique format that I'm extremely excited about. We will be joined by a panel of industry experts who are heavily involved in clinic new building projects, whether it be a veterinarian opening their first practice or an expansion or some sort of ground up construction. Our goal for the discussion today is not to get super granular about any one of these areas, but instead, we'd like to hit some high notes on each of these important areas in the process. The importance of assembling a great team and how we all interact with one another. So, joining us on the panel today, we have these industry experts representing their given field. We've got Rachel Noel, equipment specialist, Carlos Nieto, banker, Amanda Topiel, attorney, Joe Flick, real estate, and Chris Quilecki, construction. Okay, panelists, I thought it would be helpful if each of you started by sharing your title and role. When I call on you and kind of jump into some questions, if you'll just share your title and role, company, how many years you've been working with or in the vet industry, that will be great. So, Carlos, my friend, you're up. Thought it would be best to start with you, since we all know, like many things in this industry and in life, it's vital to start with the money. So, Carlos, if you'll just tell us your role, your title, and how many years you've been doing this.
Yeah, well, first off, Jimmy, thanks for having us. To give you some background about myself, I've been with Bank of America for 8 years. I serve as the vice president of our veterinary lending here in the Southeast. So I cover states of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. And been working with veterinarians for the past 4 years specifically. Prior to that was more on other roles, but excited to be here and thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos. All right, to kick things off, would you just kind of describe, what's the importance or why work with a veterinary specific lender?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits to working with a veterinary specific lender. First and foremost, you're going to get a specialized product in terms of interest rates, terms, etc. Typically, they offer longer terms and they typically offer introductory periods like interest only or graduated payments or something to help allow clients to build their business. But more than that, there's a specialization that goes on with the experience itself. And what I mean by that is veterinary specific lenders are more than just lenders. They're more of a partner to their clients in the sense that they're not just here to give them a bag of money and say, all right, your payment is due in 30 days. Hope you figure it out. Good luck. They really want to be part of the conversations in terms of who they're working with. They have a need to speak with veterinary specific contacts like attorneys, CPAs, contractors, equipment reps. A lot of these veterinary specific lenders view themselves as part of the industry, just like any of these experts that you see at, trade shows or in the industry themselves. And so really they're here to offer more than just financing. It's more to be a partnership, hold the client's hand and make sure that they can accomplish whatever they're looking to do, build a roadmap to get to the finish line.
How do student loans play a part or, cause a hurdle, or if that's something a veterinarian has still, how does that play into this whole thing?
Yeah, student loans generally doesn't really impact a client's ability to secure financing. It's viewed as any other debt or liability that a client might have. Really, what a bank's more concerned with is whatever debts they have, whether it's student loans or a mortgage or a car loan or what have you, that they're just going to make enough income to pay their debts back, plus whatever new debt they might take on with the loan. We're not debt to income ratio type lenders. We're really cash flow lenders in the sense that we want to make sure that whatever income is coming out is going to pay back whatever debts they have. So it's really not about the amount of debts or the type of debts. It's more about can we service that debt?
You mentioned, in the first part, maybe not so much hand holding, but I guess maybe you did say that, but being heavily involved in the process. So that's what you're talking about, right? Is where, the vet's probably got to bring a business plan to you, and then every kind of step preparing to open their practice, you're going to be involved, or somebody with your team to kind of know this is going to work cash flow wise or money wise. Is that something you check in frequently? Are you in constant communication with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's several touch points that we have with our clients. Obviously it starts with getting through the underwriting process, but even after underwriting, we're still going to be involved, asking them, have they had conversations with different people throughout the process? Clients are always going to be in the driver's seat. So they'll always be the one making the decision. We're here to be more of a sounding board for our clients to bounce ideas off of and to help quarterback some of these questions. Because, I mean, the reality is our clients, for the most part, have never gone through this process before. And with having someone on their team like us who have different opportunities to speak with different vendors throughout the process, we're in a unique position where we can help streamline those conversations and at least guide our clients towards the next steps in the process. A lot of our clients don't know what they don't know. So our job is to help bridge that gap and make sure they know what the next steps are, that they're really thinking everything through and ensuring that they can get to the finish line, open up their doors as quickly as possible.
How many of these projects have you been a part of in your time, and how many maybe in a given quarter or year?
Great question. So, over the 8 years that I've been with Bank of America, I've helped over 250 clients start up or acquire a clinic. Not all in the vet space, 'cause I've just been doing vet the last 4 years, but in any given year, we probably work with between 30 to 40 clients, helping them become business owners or expand or relocate, etc.
It's awesome. Okay, here's a horrible way to phrase this question, but I will. Maybe perhaps the $1 million question. How much money, or hopefully not $1 million question, Carlos, how much money do I need if I'm a vet to get starting my own practice?
Yeah, it's a great question too, just because, the more savings you can show a bank, the more comfortable they're gonna feel, right? Like when you look at what bank looks at, I mean, their job is to assess risk and what offsets risk is cash on hand or liquid assets. So generally what I tell my clients is if they can come to the table and show that they have between 5 to 10% of the total loan request, then that's going to help underwriting get comfortable with many of the requests that our clients come to for financing. It's kind of product specific, it's sort of lender specific, so it's hard to answer that to a T and to a specific dollar amount. But the more the better, generally 5 to 10% of a total loan request. So for $1 million request, anywhere between 50 to 100,000 would generally be looked at as strength. The other side of it too is understanding how long our clients have been licensed and earning a paycheck in the animal health world too, right? So if you're a newer vet and you've been out of school 2 to 3 years and you show 50 to 100,000, that probably checks the boxes off for underwriting. However, if you've been associating for 20 years and you show that same level of liquid assets, that might get scrutinized a little bit more because part of what underwriting is looking at is yes, is there a safety net in terms of liquid assets, but also understanding what your lifestyle is. So if you're a spender, if you haven't demonstrated the ability to save money, then that could be scrutinized. So part of that conversation is also looking at how long a doctor has been licensed and does their personal financial situation make sense for the time that they've had their license?
That makes sense. And I'll let you off the hot seat in just a second, Carlos. But is it also fair to say that there are some pretty concrete things, but maybe some other intangibles that an underwriter would look like to approve someone or deem them bankable? And that could be, like you mentioned, not only how many years have they been practicing, but at their current practice or their current role, how much revenue are they generating? And how likely is that to turn over to their new practice, for instance? Are there any other intangibles or recommendations you might have as a veterinarian looks to secure financing to start that endeavor?
Production is something that comes up from time to time in conversations with underwriting. A large part of our production verification can come through like earnings. Like if we see a doctor that's earning over 100,000, typically, like we're not going to question their production too much on a startup. But let's say a doctor's looking to buy a practice and rather than go down the startup route, then production starts to become a little bit more important in understanding of if they have the ability to produce what the current owner is producing. And so in those opportunities, we would require a production report. If we have doctors that are doing relief work today, that's a little bit harder to collect a production report than, say, someone who's working at a clinic as an associate. So my suggestion would be if you are a relief vet out there, if there's some way to track your production, even if it's just manually, like on a spreadsheet at home, just putting in how much production you did that day, something that the bank can look at and say, okay, this is someone who's tracked their production. That might help with some of the opportunities that we see. But in general, we look at really three things: cash flow, what type of debts our clients have, and cash on hand. So if you're able to check those boxes off, chances are you're going to secure an approval with a vet specific lender.
Okay, Amanda, if we can turn it over to you, if you don't mind, just kind of kick off before I hit you with a few questions. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yep, absolutely. And thank you for including me on the podcast. Very excited to be with everybody today who I've worked with a few times. So a good crew. So I'm Amanda Topio. I'm with the healthcare business law firm, the founding partner. We are a healthcare only law firm. We work with healthcare professionals, healthcare businesses, and we're transactional in nature. So if you have a dispute, litigation, mediation, we'll pass it to somebody else, but we can help you start your business, expand your business, buy a practice, sell a practice, and kind of everything in between. I've been in the vet world for about 2.5 years. I also work with a lot of dentists and med spas, health and wellness, but I've really focused a lot more on the vet space. It's a great space to be in, as I'm sure my fellow speakers can attest to. So that's a little bit about me.
To kick us off in your world, can you start with a very popular question, which is about non-competes? Are they still enforceable? Can they affect an associate's or a veterinarian's ability to get financing? And just kind of where are we today in that world?
I'll give an answer everybody loves. It depends on where you're at and a bunch of other things. So if everybody remembers, probably Carlos and Joe, this hit them the most, but about a year ago, there was a FTC rule where basically federally we wanted to ban non-competes nationwide so they could never be enforced. That was struck down about a year ago. And since then, there's been a little, I think, confusion throughout the community as to whether or not non-competes are enforceable. So when that was struck down, that means that non-competes are still enforceable nationwide. However, depending on your state, they may or may not be. So I'm based in Florida, so a lot of my practice is in Florida. In Florida, they are enforceable on their face. And I'll get to that in a second. But in California, they are not unless it's in connection with the sale of practice. So it can really be dependent on where you're at. Focusing a little bit more on Florida in any state really, when you look at a non-compete agreement, you always say on its face is enforceable. I get calls from brokers and lenders and they say, I have this associate looking to start up. Can you tell me if this is going to be enforceable or not? And I say, well, we don't know until somebody challenges it. So on its face, it's always going to be enforceable. In Florida, we look at time and scope, geography, whether it's reasonable. So if a non-compete is covering 3 counties and you only work in 1 county, the court's probably gonna, strike that down or at least limit the scope of it. So it really just depends on the reasonableness, time, scope, whether there's a legitimate business interest. So not just, the idea to ban competition, but, are there trade secrets involved? Or is there some goodwill? Is there specialized training that only this employee knows? So a lot of factors go into it. So it depends. Something I do want to note though is actually July 1st, I believe it was of this year, 2025, Florida passed a new law under the Choice Act, which actually strengthens non-compete enforceability in Florida. So if you are somebody who earns, I believe I'll have to go back and check, but if you earn twice the, mean salary of somebody in that county, your employer can extend non-competes up to 4 years. Whereas in Florida currently, 2 years is generally going to be presumed reasonable. So it's interesting to kind of see how that works against the federal land where they tried to ban it outright. And Florida, of course, is trying to strengthen those employer rights.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And like you said, it depends is just that's just a fact. Would you recommend, let's say an associate veterinarian's got a new practice on their brain? I mean, you're one of those first calls probably, just to or someone like yourself, just to know, can we do this? Can we, what's the
Yeah.
situation? It's wise for that person to know, are they beholden to anything? And also, like you said, enforceability. I don't want to paint any broad strokes here, but if an associate's leaving an independent hospital, if you will, or a single owner, could be viewed much differently than a corporate practice, and that non-compete holders' willingness, ability, or just what they'd like to do, maybe even to set precedent, or I mean, there's so many factors that can determine that point, I guess, right?
Yeah, and that is often the first step when I'm talking to clients. It's an associate looking to expand and they have a non-compete radius of 5 miles and they want to be, 4.5 miles in that radius. So the interesting thing is just depending on the contract, it can be limited, right? So maybe it only applies to a primary location you were at and not a secondary location. Maybe the specific services that you can provide under this new company, as long as they don't overlap with your current employer, there's not going to be an issue. So it's definitely a great first step. And, I could even pivot to Carlos at this point. If there's an outright ban and, if they want to do the exact same services in this radius, they're going to have a pretty hard time getting lending. So we either need to get ourselves out of that, see if there's some language in there that works to our benefit. And if not, we maybe try and negotiate with the employer, see what we can get done. So there's definitely ways to get creative, but it's definitely a first step that everybody needs to look at before they go down this path of, expending time, effort, money towards a project that may not come to fruition right now, at least.
Okay, this is a good segue almost to our friend Joe as well, but can you speak to zoning and land use laws and that sort of thing, on the physical land and or building aspect and kind of the legalese around that?
Most vets are looking for physical space. There are definitely some mobile, but most are looking for physical space. So when Joe or a broker is looking for a space for you, they're going to be looking at, can we actually operate here? Can we actually have a vet practice here? Vet can be a little trickier than other healthcare specialties inherently. Joe, I know, is great at being very proactive and either reaching out to the county or city and getting some sort of, zoning verification before the client moves forward with pursuing this location just to make sure, it's clear there. Zoning, you have different zoning districts and sometimes the use is permitted, which means, you're good to go. Sometimes it's conditional or special permit, meaning you have to go in front of a board and plead your case and hope that they'll say okay. And just depending on where it's at, who the board is, the city, the county, you don't know how that's going to go. So if zoning is set up and it's permitted, that's where we want to be. And then on top of that, even when you get past that, something to think about is in the space that you're looking at, are there private restrictions, right? So some lease agreements in bigger complexes, they'll say, prohibited uses, and maybe veterinary clinic is on there. So you go through the LOI stage, you get this far, and now it's showing up that maybe you can't operate in here. Or if you're in, a condo association similar to an HOA, they'll say, no animals allowed in this neighborhood, in this condo complex. So even if you get through the city and county requirements, there could be private restrictions that can obviously halt you if it's a prohibited use. So definitely something to be on the lookout for when you're looking at spaces.
I know this goes into Joe's repertoire as well, so we probably get in a little bit here. But on the lease, let's say you're, going into a grocery store, shopping center, you're in the last stall or whatever that looks like. Do you like to take a look at those lease agreements and contracts? To contract, there's all kinds of things in there. Is that in your wheelhouse, or do you like to pull someone in like Joe to review those, or both?
So I'll work hand in hand with Joe or another broker. So he deals a lot with the economics and he gets the major terms in a good spot. But I always review my clients' leases. They can be 40, 50, 60-page documents. Most of my clients don't want to sit there and read that, so I take that on and read every single little word. There's always something hidden somewhere. A lease is one of your most valuable contracts and the most impactful. You're usually locked in for a minimum of 5 years. You have renewal periods, like you can be in a space for 20 years. So that is definitely a contract to review, and even if you can't change certain terms, you're aware of the impact and what could happen if something like that happens. Right. So definitely look at this.
Thank you.
Somebody, even yourself, if it's not me.
Yeah, no, thank you. You're right. It can't be overemphasized how important that particular contract is because, like you said, I mean, some wording could get you stuck in a space 24 months longer or whatever you want to describe, but it could really impact your ability to practice today and then kind of where you take things in the years to come. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
excellent. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience there. So, Joe, welcome in, sir. Would you tell
Hey,
our audience a little bit about yourself and your experience, please?
yeah, Jimmy, appreciate you having me on with this distinguished panel here. It's really hard to follow Carlos and Amanda, but I'll do my best. I'm with CAR. We're the largest tenant buyer brokerage in the United States, healthcare specific. I work specifically with veterinarians. It's a significant part of my pipeline at any given time. And I work in Central Florida, Orlando, and then the surrounding counties and municipalities as well. So I've been with the company a little over 6 years focusing on veterinary.
Okay. Can you just describe, the benefits or things you'll find working with a veterinary specific agent like yourself versus non-specific to vet?
Yeah. I think Carlos touched on it pretty well, and I can expand on that, but it's the nuance of it, right? So you want somebody that's an expert in your specific field and not an expert at everything because it's almost impossible to be an expert at everything. And using someone that's well aware with how vets operate or how they need to operate really eliminates a lot of the noise when it comes to finding a space because we know what you're looking for. Whether that be we're asking questions on the front end, like, are you working with exotics? How big do you envision your practice being? How many exam rooms do you envision yourself bringing on an associate pretty quickly? And that's on the startup side. If you're looking at an existing practice that needs to expand, how many exam rooms do you have now versus what do you want? And then when we're kind of reverse engineering it, we're looking at the market in general in the surrounding area, making sure that they're within a 2 to 3 mile radius of the core of their patient base. And any specific properties that are out there, do they fall in the realm of what will work from a redesign, upfit, financing perspective? And are you able to get enough exam rooms in there to cost justify moving into something like that?
Excellent. When you're first engaging with a veterinarian looking to start a practice or looking for the piece of land or a space, what's the best way to get started at that? Sometimes it's hard to even know where to go. What are some of those starting criteria, if you will?
So my goal in those initial conversations is just to literally have a conversation, learn about the doctor, build trust on a human level, just talking to them about, where they've been, where they want to go, do they have family, do they have kids, and then slowly build a box of items that we need to check when it comes to building their practice, when it comes to what part of life they're in their professional career. So if that is a startup, I touched on it a little bit, but are you surgery centric? Do you just want to do exams? Are you heavy into dentistry? Do you work with exotics? If you're a large animal vet, where are you based out of, and what areas do you cover? Considering they're usually covering a larger territory than a small animal veterinarian. These are all questions that come into play on the front end when we're asking, and then kind of getting an idea of where they want to be. Do they want to be close to where they live? Are they open to looking at different markets that are emerging? Are they okay with competition? Typically a veterinarian doesn't want to be like a dentist right across the street from another veterinarian. But at the same time, depending on the practice, that could be an option. Maybe it's a specialty hospital that they could be close to, or maybe they focus on certain elements of treatment that a vet down the street we know would be almost a referral basis rather than competition for. So these are things on the front end that we kind of use to qualify where we could potentially look at from a marketing perspective. And then we bring in the other elements or the other players in the game as well, if they haven't already been introduced to them. I'm asking them, do they have an equipment supplier? Have they talked to any lenders? Do you have an attorney lined up yet? Who's your GC, architect, CPA? So that if they don't have these pieces in place already, we can begin to surround them with a team that will help them move towards their common goal and also be a sounding board for potential problems that might come up in the future.
That's a great point you bring up, and assembling the team. And when you engage with someone like yourself that's plugged into the industry, there's a high likelihood, no matter where you are in the country, someone like you has already had experience doing projects like this and can probably refer your client to those different experts that have a good reputation and have done this to help them avoid pitfalls and that sort of thing. What are pros and cons, short-term versus long-term lease? Let's say I'm an associate. How do I know? How do I even think about that part of it and what those details look like?
So if you're an associate and you're trying to, I guess, gauge where you want to be from 5 to 10 years from now, it's hard. You don't know really what tomorrow's going to bring, what economic factors, political factors are going to come into play that are going to determine what your next play is going to be. Usually, it varies, like Amanda liked to, so rightly put it. It really does. If we can find a second generation vet hospital in an area that shows good signs of being able to build or establish another practice, we can heavily take a look at that. And you can do a 5-year lease in a place like that, hopefully with some TI from a landlord in order to freshen the space up. If it's second gen, it's probably worn out. You need flooring, you need new paint on the walls, you need to brand it according to what you want to do. So those cosmetic facelifts are relatively inexpensive. If you're looking at a new burgeoning area where it's nothing but new construction, houses going in everywhere, new retail spaces, typically you're going to want to do a 10-year lease for a couple of reasons. One, it gives the landlord more time to amortize the economics of all the deal points we're going to push for into that lease term. TI, free rent, we can get more aggressive on your base rent, reduction off of the landlord's asking price. There are different things that go into play that will allow us to be more aggressive, especially when we tell that landlord, if they're not working with multiple shopping centers that they own and have other veterinarians, if this is their first foray with a veterinarian, I'm leveraging on the front end, they default less than almost anyone else, if not everyone else in the commercial real estate industry, less than 1%. Also, they're clean. It's not your idea of the veterinary hospital that we had from 30, 40 years ago. They mitigate sound, they're clean, they're meticulous, they're good tenants to have, and they're good neighboring tenants to have for other neighbors nearby as well. And we're using all these deal points to really emphasize and hone in with the landlord and let them know, this is what you get. This is how excited you should be to have them. And then we're turning around and leveraging that blue chip tenant to make sure that they know, A, we're looking at multiple options in the market, and B, in order to get there, we need you to get here. So the best leverage we can have is showing them how good of a tenant that they can be. And then B, saying, you're not the only bell we're trying to take to the ball. There are other people in the game here. What can you do to incentivize us to get this long-term, sure thing tenant in there beyond that initial scope of time, which is why that 10 years is really important. And the second part to that is your lender's typically going to require a 10-year term in order to lend to them, or a 5 with 2 options, depending on the lender. And then the landlord's going to want to see with new construction, the landlord and the landlord's lender, if there's a bank involved, there usually is, going to want to see 10 or 7-year terms on the front end for any first generation tenant that's going in.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very helpful. I wanted to touch on a couple quick things that you said really quick. Points of clarification. You said TI, that's tenant improvements, correct?
Thank you. Yes. Sometimes I get embedded in my own lingo.
Well, that's why you're good at what you do, Joe. You're all in. I want to know who pays for that. Is everything negotiable? It's like anything, if you're new to the game or new to a process or a place or whatever it is, when you're presented with a contract or a thing, a roadmap, if you will, you may not know that you can question that. You can negotiate that. And you started to touch on it. I love when you were kind of already getting into your mode to pump up our veterinary client, if you will, to the landlord, the shopping center owner. I loved hearing you say this blue chip client and less than 1% default rate. It sounds like you were just building a negotiation there. Our tenant improvements and how many things are negotiable in this process?
So on my end of the deal, there's a lot more negotiable than once Amanda gets into the hair of it, I would say, and maybe she would disagree with me. But when you're looking at the overall LOI that spells out the basic economics of the deal, the blueprint that we're going to take once negotiated and put into the actual lease language that spells out all the details of it. Most of that in there is going to be negotiable to a certain extent, but it's a bucket essentially. If you're taking things from one bucket, it's going to affect the others, because at the end of the day, there's only so much money that the landlord can put into a deal in order for it to still make financial sense for them. So if you're trying to get really aggressive on the base rent side of things, the TI, the tenant improvement allowance that the landlord's going to give you or reimburse you to help build out your space is going to be less, because there's less base rent for them to amortize the TI into the entire term. So one will eventually affect the other. I like to call it kind of like a rubber band. We can stretch that rubber band only to a certain point before it snaps. So we can try to do an even keel negotiation strategy where we try to take a little bit of off the top across the board, or we can see what works from 2 or 3 specific deal points that makes the most sense for you and you want to get the most aggressive on. And then we kind of leave the rest as is or close to as is. I prefer to take a little bit off the front end. Every landlord's different too, depending on we're looking at art of war, know thy enemy. They're not your enemy. They're somebody that you want to build a relationship with over time, but it still stands true that you want to know who you're negotiating with on the back end. Is it a large multinational landlord with billions of dollars in assets? Are we talking about a mom and pop landlord that owns 1, maybe 2 properties? If that's the case, a mom and pop landlord isn't going to have $55, $60 a square foot in TI just lying around to put into the space on a second or third generation space. Usually we're talking about free rent there to compensate you. On the other hand, if it is a large landlord with multiple properties, they have different financial obligations on the back end too that they have to be sensitive about. Banks are very sensitive about keeping base rent within a certain parameter, and they're more willing to give TI than a mom and pop landlord would be, because at the end of the day, they want to make the space as valuable as possible by having a larger cap rate, which is affected by that base rent. So the higher the base rent, the better the cap rate for that potential landlord.
That makes sense. And I gotta say, you said one of our favorite words in the industry twice, my friend. You said free. Like you also said, with a lot of these things, it just depends. A hot spot, hot location, highly visible, a property, if you will, or shopping center. Your ability to negotiate rent or what's free or TI or all that goes up and down with those factors. If it's a highly in demand location, obviously you're probably less able to negotiate these different points. The landlord might say, "Hey, thanks for your interest. I got 10 other people going to move in."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But if you're out of town or wherever and they're dying to get some income in a tenant, you're probably in a pretty good spot. So there's trade-offs.
Amen.
Okay, is leasing my only option, or could I buy something, or as a new, let's say, a new practice starter?
Great question. Again, it depends. And Carlos will tell you this as well, or any lender that you get involved with, that in many instances, there is the ability to buy, or at least look at the market to see if you can buy, but it really depends on how liquid you are, how much cash you have on hand, credit history. Do you have any partners that are going to be involved in the process as well? And we can, on the front end, take a look at leases versus purchases. And we have in many instances, and Carlos and I have several examples of this as well, or we have taken startups to the market and found spaces that work for them from a purchase perspective. And in many instances, it does make sense to own if you can do a longer amortization term, SBA versus conventional lending. All these factors come into play. And in many instances, it may make more sense to buy a property that is larger from a monthly cash flow perspective than it would to go into a leasehold space for 10 years. It really depends. And any brokerage firm that you use, just make sure that they have the ability to compare and show you on a spreadsheet a breakdown of what it might look like to own versus lease. And that's something that we can definitely use as a tool to show them what makes sense and what doesn't.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your insights there. The All Things Veterinary podcast is sponsored by Patterson Veterinary, supplier of products, equipment, software, services, and essentials for your practice. Patterson goes the extra mile to make sure you get what you need quickly, develops ways to help your practice run a little better, and backs it all with legendary customer service. Find All Things Veterinary at PattersonVet.com. Chris, you're up to talk construction. As we kick it off, could you just, introduce yourself and tell us your role and how long you've been in the industry and that sort of thing, please, sir?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jimmy, and thanks, Patterson, for having myself as well as the entire panel. I think this is a great opportunity. So my name's Chris Pileski. I'm with Blue Frog in their business development department. I've been with Blue Frog almost a year now, not quite a year, but I've been in the industry almost 25 years in various different capacities. Had the pleasure to work with most everyone here on this panel. So thanks for having us.
Okay. Can you just kind of kick us off by describing some of the differentiators and the differences with a veterinary focus design build firm or construction company, if you will, and then maybe the different types or non-veterinary specific firms?
Great question. So in the traditional sense of looking at either a remodel or a ground up, a veterinarian would go hire an architect, right? And that architect would design the space. Potentially the architect could be a healthcare architect, maybe not, but would design that space to how that veterinarian envisioned it. And then those plans would be submitted for permitting. And then once they're through that permitting process, they would be taken to another person, a general contractor, to bid that out. Maybe that GC is healthcare space. Maybe they've done veterinary hospitals before. Maybe they haven't. With Blue Frog, it's all under one roof. We're both the architect and the contractor. So we do all in-house. I think that helps align vision, eliminates discrepancies, and it's kind of like if we design it, we know what it costs. So there's no concern that you're not going to come in over or under budget. So it just helps streamline the process, makes it faster. We can do the permitting process for you. It's all under one roof.
That makes sense. And I don't, with any of our experts here, I don't want to knock any relative, friend, aunt, uncle, cousin that might play one of these roles in, anything that we do, whether it's banking or real estate, attorney, or construction. But Chris, you've been in the industry for 25 years, man. I mean, I know you've been a part of projects that someone started or built a practice with a contractor that's done it before, and with some that are maybe residential contractors or other commercial specialties. And I think it can't be understated how nice it is to work with somebody who's built or built out a veterinary clinic before. I mean, would you agree?
So when they design a space, whatever square footage that may be, whether it's a second generation space and it's a remodel, or whether it's a ground up, they're going to maximize that entire space. They're going to get everything they can out of it. The workflow is going to be as best as it can be because that's what they do. So when you go talk to an architect who maybe has done vet hospital before, maybe they haven't, and then another GC who's maybe they're local and they say they can do it, maybe they have done vet before.
That makes sense. We've got the design, maybe we're starting the project. We all know it's a thing. It's a challenge. It's a big endeavor to build out or build up a veterinary hospital or any building or project, if you will. But, we hate the word delay, but construction delay. Can you talk about factors that contribute to delays? Maybe you projected this project's going to take 11 months or 8 months, whatever, but what contributes to a delay, or what are those factors that kind of play into that?
The biggest unknown is permitting. Every municipality, every county is different. Some areas we have expediters that we work with locally, as well as we have a dedicated team on the inside at Blue Frog to deal with permitting. But that's where the veterinarian can feel like, okay, we hurried up to this point and now we're waiting. We try to communicate that with the veterinarian up front of what to expect for permitting given each municipality and county, but that can be probably the biggest hurdle, I would say, or time delay. The next one is making changes during the process. So especially when you're looking at remodels, inevitably when you start pulling out walls, pulling floors, you don't always know what you're going to uncover, right? So there's going to be changes that come up during the construction phase. Ground up, maybe not so much, but you may see things that you want to change during the process that you thought you liked, but you decide it's different. So the good thing with design build at Blue Frog is we designed it so we can change it. You don't have to go back to a different architect, then back to a GC and start over again. So we are very thorough through the design process. We actually bring every client into our office, sit down with our design team on multiple different stages, and let them see what this is really going to look like so that we can eliminate those changes and stay on time.
That makes sense. And you mentioned a word I think is worth touching again on, which is municipalities. I think knowing someone like yourself, or a Joe, or anybody on this panel is valuable when it comes to municipalities. I've had some vets I've worked with over years. I know you have too, Chris, that they just wanted to strike out on their own. They weren't necessarily beholden to this area or this hometown, but they're like, I just want to go open my hospital in the best area of North Georgia or Oklahoma or wherever, right? And I think it's so valuable to call someone like you or Joe or any of us that are dialed in to say, that's awesome. Here are some things to consider. Here are some counties or cities or municipalities to potentially avoid because they're very difficult to deal with. There's some that are eager to have you in, and the process is simple. And then sometimes, like you said, the permitting process and just all the things. I mean, you're 6 weeks before that first meeting or whatever those timeframes look like. So thank you for bringing up municipalities. That can really dictate the length of a project, I would say. But you mentioned something too, managing expectations. So I think this is probably the key number one point to ask you about, Chris, is when you're speaking with a vet, hey, Chris, I'm an associate. I'm ready to do my own thing. I want to start my own practice. I want to build out this space, or I want to build ground up. How do you describe setting the right expectations for this whole endeavor to start with respect to construction?
To me, expectation is everything, right? If you overpromise and underdeliver, it's never a good thing. We really pride ourselves on keeping them in the know so that they don't feel like nothing is happening and time is ticking and Carlos is telling them that their loan has a time limit on it, right? And they're worried that they're going to have to start making payments and the door's not going to be open. I think setting the right expectation, and expectations is not just telling them that everything's going to go great because we're so good. You got to tell them and expect that there are going to be delays. There are going to be problems, but we know what those are. We've dealt with them before. We'll deal with them when they come up, and we'll keep you in the loop. So it's not just giving them the expectation that this is going to be perfect.
Agreed. Well, thank you for sharing, Chris. And this is also a good segue to our friend Rachel and the kind of the communication that you mentioned, Chris, not only with you and the veterinarian or the banker, whoever, but with everyone on this kind of panel. Rachel, I want to bring you in because oftentimes during the build out phase, the communication that goes on with the construction crew to maybe your equipment provider and the timing and the staging, that's a whole nother conversation. So Rachel, welcome in. And if you'll just tell us a little bit about your role and experience in the industry as well.
Sure. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having me, and excited to be with all these fine people here. So a little bit about my title is I'm an equipment specialist with Patterson Veterinary. I have the top of Florida, South Georgia, and a piece of Alabama. I have been in the veterinary industry for 26 years, 13 of those being in practice and the other 13 being with Patterson.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, you just won the prize. You beat Chris. 26 years. That's awesome. Okay, let's just kind of talk equipment and supplies, if you will, and what a veterinarian should look for as they start to figure out how they want to equip their hospital and who they should work with.
Absolutely. I think the hands down most important thing that you can look for in a partner is someone that's truly invested in the practice and not about just making a sale. I think that means clear communication, product knowledge, follow through. You want someone who is going to understand the equipment, going to offer guidance based on what's best for your clinic, not just because of it being in stock or it being the best price or the lowest price or the highest price. And I think, above all, integrity matters. Trust and transparency go a very long way in these type of partnerships, and it creates a great experience not only for the client and the clinic, but also for the partner.
I love that, Rachel. Thank you. I love the phrase you just used, not just making the sale. To get started on your old equipment list, if you will, and kind of just starting this process, there's a lot to that. It can be overwhelming, and how do you get started? And there's a budget and different things. How do you coach your clients through, these numbers of options and not feel so overwhelmed?
I completely understand that sometimes this process can be super overwhelming. There's many options. The client's unsure of what their needs are. When building a practice or adding imaging, these decisions are significant. They affect the doctor, their family, client, patient, the overall practice. It's a responsibility that I do not take lightly. The first step that I always try to do is just listen carefully. I really want to fully understand their workflow, their goals, their budget, and try to envision everything that they're wanting in the space. From there, I try to break it down into manageable phases, focusing on what's essential right now and the things that can wait for the future. And I think that education and support are very, very important. I want them to feel confident. I want them to feel informed, and I want them to never feel pressured into making a decision. So if we can give them all of that support and education, not only on the front end, but after they pick that piece of equipment or those pieces of equipment, it'll make them feel a lot comfortable using them so that they're not just sitting off to the side. And then ultimately, it's just about making this process and making the process smooth and making sure that every decision aligns with what their vision and values are for the long term.
Thank you, Rachel. Here's a random one. What's one piece of advice that you'd give to a veterinarian about to start their first practice or go on an endeavor like we've been talking about today?
One piece of advice, I would say plan for the future, not just what you need today, but what you may need in 3, 5, 10 years. Make sure that your space and your equipment will keep up and plan and allow for that growth. Invest in quality equipment. It's going to last you a long time. Maybe you invest in that really something special that you want in that space, in your space. It's yours. It's your dream space. Make it yours. You'll never regret doing that. And I think with that planning for the future, it's really just not being afraid to lean on the people that have the expertise and having that trusted partner in your corner and that team in your corner. It's going to make a huge difference.
That's awesome. Thank you. How often would you say during a new build process that you're in communication with the vet and also the other team members, whether that's Carlos in this example or a Chris in construction? What does that look like, frequency and interaction there?
What's been the saying today? It depends.
Okay, yes. Good.
So I think, initially you start with a lot of conversation with the banker. So with a Carlos, you're on the front end, you're talking to that person quite a bit. And then again, usually at the end as things are closing out and wrapping up. But same thing with attorney, a lot on the front end. The realtor as well in the front end a lot as we're kind of going through that design process, picking a space. GC is continuous conversation from the time that we're planning the space, speccing out the equipment, coordinating the delivery, site inspections, and then punching everything out with deliveries and installation. So pretty consistent throughout the entire process. And then I would say, as far as the doctor goes, I try to keep them involved as much as they want to be involved. Sometimes people just want us to take it and run with it, and they want to continue working or focus on the other things that they need to be doing, whether it's hiring people, setting their pricing and they say, just take care of it. I got you. I trust the process. And then you have a lot of doctors that want to be really, really involved and they want to be on the calls and they want to be at all the meetings and they want to know when things are coming. And I think getting that established on the front end will kind of set the groundwork for what each customer wants and what their expectations are.
Agreed. Agreed. Good points there. And on this kind of note, wouldn't you agree it does matter choosing partners, and of course I'm talking to you about equipment on this one, is like you want to choose partners with the history, reputation, and feel good about them being around to support you and your equipment and the things in your hospital for years and years to come. Is there anything you can add on that when it comes to choosing maybe not specific pieces of equipment, just how you go about, making different choices of manufacturer and that sort of thing?
We kind of have a lot of the equipment specialists have a good, better, best type of mentality. And again, it goes back into the workflow, the budget, what the customer's needs are. Maybe they're thinking about getting into dentistry, but it's not something that they do every single day. So maybe they don't need the tippy top of the line imaging because they're not really sure if they're going to use it. So I think it just goes back to, it depends on the customer, but we do try to lend with that good, better, best mentality and really educate them and understand what their needs and wants are. Being a distribution company, we're going to work with and we're going to support and recommend manufacturers that we know are going to support the products that they make. So I'm only as good as the support that I get from the equipment that's made and that representation of that company that's going to help me when I need help. And so a lot of times we're going to lean towards more to manufacturers that we know are going to support us in the field when we have an issue arise with a piece of equipment and stand behind their product. So I think that partnership plays a big piece into it as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to put you on the spot on this one because I've known you a long time and I know that you served many different roles at Patterson. As a former, what I call, for lack of a better description, normal sales rep at Patterson or a distribution company. You're an equipment specialist. Patterson has technology specialists, but for the normal territory rep, as we call it, or sales rep, that's also a member of this team. I'm going to call on you to kind of represent, put on your old hat for that as well. What role does the kind of point person of your preferred distributor, let's say Patterson in this case, what role does that everyday Patterson rep play in the life cycle or process with a vet starting a new practice?
That's a great question. I was a territory manager for 11 years that I was with Patterson. I think that role is extremely valuable and extremely important. They are the local experts that live within the territory that your practice is going to be in. They know who's going in where most of the time. They know the good areas, the bad areas. They know where there's development. They are going to be the quarterback of your practice that's going to reach out and provide resources and a team for you, whatever that may be, whether it's me as an equipment specialist when you need equipment, whether it's a manufacturer rep for a flea product or a suture. They work with finance, they work with our realtors. They are the first primary point of contact for you at your practice. And they're going to lean on that team, which is going to be everybody that you see here and even beyond that, to bring them into the practice and give you the support and resources that you need. So I think they're extremely valuable. They're the ones that you're going to see all the time. They're there every week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, depending upon their call cycle. And the more that you have a better relationship with that local representative, I think it's going to make your life a lot easier as a practice owner because you have one person that you can come to. That's going to, if they don't know, they have a lot of people that they can go and ask. So just leaning on them as much as you can.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. I wrote down a few words that I heard a couple different times from you guys I thought was worth a recap. Good listener. Rachel, you said that. Integrity, reputation, trust. Joe said the word free. I'm just kidding. But I think that those things matter. And I want our veterinary friends to know that we take these roles every bit as serious as they take in their profession and their reputation in their community, and that working with solid team members and we all know each other. And here's cool, Rachel, you mentioned this. I know this is the case for Chris as well, and myself. Many of us too have served different roles in the industry. And so you can give different perspectives from different points of view, and that can be long-term views and, starting your practice. And I just think it's really neat when you do kind of lean on industry professionals that have experience. You can learn a lot from them. And our goal is, this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is a long-term view. We're looking for partners, just like you look for those clients that, rely on you and trust your opinions. That's how we view this whole process. So thank you guys for that. Here's something I wanted to touch on that also is worth mentioning. The people that we don't have on this panel that probably could, from an accountant to a marketing guru to a technology website, social media, all that. There are also other team members that we didn't really have time to squeeze in on this panel. And again, that's where you reach out to one of the folks who represent a role on this panel. They'll be able to probably point you in good directions of people they've worked with in the past to help make other veterinarians successful for these other things. So, crew, does anybody have any questions or any follow-up comments that they want to toss out before we wrap up?
Really quickly, yeah. Amanda, if I could, you touched on creating entities and making sure that you're protecting themselves from as much as possible. When a veterinarian goes to sign a lease and they are required to sign a personal guarantee, how is that in odds with protecting themselves from an entity perspective when they're forming that in the first place, to allow a degree of separation from the landlord and acquiring anything on their sides? And how does it not? Can you kind of go into that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, that was a good question, because you will sign your lease under an entity, but most sophisticated landlords will require the owners of the entity to personally guarantee the lease. So just like when you get a loan from Bank of America and you have to personally guarantee the lease, you are committing to the bank that if the tenant can't handle this, the tenant entity, that you personally can. So we can get creative. We can limit it to just the owner and maybe not their spouse. Some sophisticated landlords will always require the spouse of an owner to be on there. Sometimes you can get around that. We can limit the scope. Maybe it's only for the first few years of a term. Maybe we can do some carve outs where we can transfer some assets, in connection with estate planning. So it is at odds in the sense that your tenant entity is there to protect you and your practice and separate those assets and liabilities. But there's ways we can get creative to limit your personal liability. And I will note that certain items like your home, retirement accounts, things like that, your bigger assets typically are not going to be touchable. So maybe your car in your personal name or cash in your bank account under your personal name. So there's ways to get creative. And what I would always recommend for any practice owner, professional, is to connect with some sort of estate tax attorney so that you can set up your practice and your life professionally and personally, set up well for the future for you and your family.
Thank you.
I've been part of really good opportunities, and I've had opportunities that, maybe weren't as strong as others in terms of how we've gotten to the finish line. And Jimmy, you mentioned, working with family members or working with someone that maybe isn't vet specific. And while I don't necessarily want to step on their toes and say, hey, they're not capable of doing those jobs, from my point of view and the experience that I've had over the years, my question that I always come back to is, why not give yourself every bit of opportunity to be as successful as possible, right? It's not to say that someone who's not vet specific can't do the job or can't find a way to build a clinic or do the lease negotiations, but in a lot of cases, you're taking out close to $1 million, if not more. And if you're looking to save on some costs, sure, I understand the want to do that, but this is not the time really to be thinking about skimping costs or finding ways to not bring in experts. In a lot of cases, it's not going to be that much more expensive. In the case of a real estate agent, for example, Joe, you coming into the picture, there's no cost to our clients, right? That's taken care of on the back end with the owners and with the landlords themselves. In the case of an attorney, having someone who understands the local laws from a vet perspective is absolutely critical when negotiating and finalizing the lease and all the other contracts that come into play. From a construction standpoint, I mean, Chris, you and I just finalized a project where your design was able to include an additional exam room versus any other floor plan that other architects and designers had put into play. And as we know, exam rooms are really what drives the revenue in the clinic. When we talk about bringing people into the mix and make these introductions, from my perspective, really trying to bring in someone who really understands the industry gives you that much more of an ability to be successful and not only open up your doors, but also start with everything that you're going to need to be successful long term. So I just wanted to highlight that because I mean there's a reason why we're all here on the podcast here today, really talking about the industry. And I think that's an important thing to highlight because we all work with people who don't bring in someone that is vet specific or doesn't have the experience, and those are the areas where things can start to pose some additional risk, and you might very well be able to see yourself through it. But if you're looking at the chances for the ability to be as least stressful as possible, bringing in someone who's got the experience and the knowledge is ultimately going to be in your best interest, especially when you're talking about the amount of money that's needed to finance these opportunities.
Those are great points, Carlos. It's nice when you have someone that can say, been there, done that, dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of times. That's nice. And real quick, worth mentioning, the best way to ruin a friendship or make Thanksgiving dinner taste really bad is to do business with your loved one or friend and things go awry. I hate it. We've all seen it, so that's something to kind of keep in mind.
I did want to piggyback off of Carlos really quickly. You will spend more money trying to fix the mistakes that were made up front than attempting to do it correct the first time. The amount of clients I've had come to me who, did it themselves or had a friend do it, and now we need to undo it and fix it. It takes time, effort. Untangling it may not be as easy as you think. So just to kind of reiterate what Carlos was saying, we know it hurts in the startup phase, throwing this money out there. You have, limited cash right now, but it really will set you up for the future much better if you are working with people who know what they're doing and can guide you through the path of least resistance.
One other thing that I'll mention for anyone that's listening that has an inkling to become an owner, I'd say reach out to any of us. Reach out to a lender, reach out to an attorney, reach out to a real estate agent. Just start having the conversation because I think you'll find that it's a lot easier to become an owner than what you realize. I'm not going to guarantee it's going to be stress-free, but what we strive to do is build a team around you so that you have every opportunity to be as successful as possible. The worst thing that any of us is going to say is, hey, right now, this is what you look like, but if you do X, Y, and Z, you can improve your chances on being successful. Because maybe there's something that's needing improvement on your business plan, or maybe there's something that needs improvement with your credit or your savings. It's always great to have a baseline on where to start and then go from there. Know that you're not alone and that everyone on this podcast is very passionate about helping you become an owner and to be as successful as possible. And know that our doors are always open and we'd love to have those conversations with you as soon as possible.
Carlos, very well said, my friend. I think that's a great way for us to wrap up. And I'll just add that we'll provide in the show notes contact information for everybody in their respective companies. And just want to thank you guys for coming on the podcast today to share with our audience. So thank you all and talk again soon. Thank you for listening. Join us for more ideas and inspiration on the next All Things Veterinary podcast.